The dust rose in silent swirls as the air shimmered under the heat of twin suns. At the edge of a red, rocky valley, they descended, not with the violence of invaders, but with the slow, deliberate grace of something ancient and certain. The structure that followed, if one could call it that, unfolded from the sky like a blooming, metallic tree. Its roots twisted into the desert floor with an eerie elegance, neither drilling nor crushing but merging with the earth in an almost respectful embrace. The humans stood frozen. Dr. Elias Monroe, a cultural xenolinguist with more years of theory than fieldwork, wiped the sweat from his brow with a trembling hand. Beside him, his assistant Mia Calderon stared wide-eyed at the figures disembarking. They were not what she expected. No glistening weapons, no glowing eyes. Just beings tall, lean, hairless, and deeply expressive. Their skin shimmered like old bronze, tied over elongated skulls and intricate ridges that looked carved by time rather than biology. One of them stepped forward. Its eyes, unsettling their size, depth, and silence, swept the humans like a censer might. But there was no menace, only curiosity. Elias stepped forward, clearing his throat, and tried to recall the basic gestures they had agreed on. Open hands, slow movement, eye contact if possible. He held his hands out and said, softly, "We welcome you." The alien tilted its head. It blinked once, then mirrored Elias's gesture. Open palms, chest forward. An unmistakable signal, acknowledgement. For a moment, there was peace. The wind shifted, and a quiet fell upon the valley. Cameras rolled from a safe distance. Global feeds began to buzz. Across Earth, people watched, breath held. It was happening. Then came the moment, small, insignificant to most, but catastrophic in hindsight. Mia, still wide-eyed, muttered under her breath, "I wonder they'll laugh when they find out we work 40 hours a week just to live." The alien, still standing within earshot, froze. Its head swiveled toward her. The translator device, still syncing with human languages, processed the sentence aloud in a soft, synthesized voice. "We work 40 hours a week just to live." There was silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, the alien began to emit a low, guttural sound. At first, it seemed like distress. A few humans reached for communication pads, worried something had gone wrong. But then another alien joined in, and another, until the sound rippled among them, like a chorus of choked gasps and high-pitched wheezing. They were laughing, or something like it. Elias frowned. "That wasn't a joke," he said quietly. The laughter continued. It wasn't cruel. If anything, it felt confused, as if they were trying to understand why the punchline didn't make sense. One of them stepped forward, a smaller figure with luminous markings along its temple ridges, and spoke. "Your rituals," it said to the translator, "are exceptionally dry satire." "No," Elias said. That's real." She wasn't joking. The alien stared at him. "You labor for survival?" it asked, voice flat but somehow astonished. Your finite days, are divided into servitude?" "Yes," Mia replied, now defensive. "We have jobs. We have to pay for housing, food, energy. It's how things work." A third alien approached, holding what looked like a shimmering, pedal-like device. It vibrated and emitted a projection. Statistical models, timelines, hieroglyphic equations. It showed human lifespans, labor data, planetary resource allocations. "You consume your time in exchange for permission to exist," the third one said. Mia's face flushed. "We don't put it like that, but kind of." There was another moment of silence. The aliens did not laugh this time. They stood still, absorbing the information like it was radiation, dangerous, invisible, and impossible to unsee. Elias watched their expressions shift. What had begun as amusement was now something heavier. Shock, maybe. Pity. The smallest alien, still focused on Mia, stepped closer. "We misjudged. We assumed irony." "Yeah," she muttered. "So did we?" A low tone echoed from the base of the alien structure. One of them turned, responding with a gesture that seemed both urgent and respectful. The aliens murmured among themselves, not in anger, but in a low, analytical cadence. A decision was being made. They're recalibrating their approach. Elias said, half to himself. They thought we were joking. But we weren't, Mia whispered. In the distance, the structure pulsed once, and a signal burst into the air, bright and silent, like a breath of data released to the stars. The aliens weren't just reporting findings. They were broadcasting a warning, or perhaps a revelation. A fourth alien, one who had yet to speak, finally did. We believed you had transcended instinct, that your culture had evolved beyond the ancient struggle for survival. Elias looked down. So did we? The wind picked up again, brushing across the red sands, as if the planet itself exhaled. Somewhere behind them, the other humans, soldiers, scientists, translators, stood frozen, waiting for instruction, waiting for understanding. But there was none. The aliens turned and began to return to their vessel, silent now. No dramatic farewell, no grand gestures. Just quiet movement, measured, solemn, as if they had seen enough. Mia looked at Elias, then at the towering root-like structure behind them. What now? Elias didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the shimmering pulse at the heart of the alien vessel, a heartbeat of another civilization, now reconsidering everything it thought it knew about Earth. They'll be back, he said finally, but not for celebration. And with that, the alien ship began to lift, its roots pulling free without disturbing a single grain of sand. A hum filled the air, low and vibrating. As it rose, the humans watched, not in triumph, not in fear, but in quiet reckoning. Something fundamental had been revealed, and no one was laughing anymore. The alien vessel hovered silently in orbit, cloaked in an electromagnetic veil that bent light around its hull. From the ground, it was invisible. Yet every government, every satellite, every eye pointed skyward knew it was still there. Humanity waited. But the aliens did not return immediately. Instead, they watched. Within the ship's inner sanctum, a gathering of analysts convened in concentric rings of glowing bioluminescent panels. The atmosphere was quiet, contemplative. It was not protocol to analyze a culture so early or so deeply. First contact was usually ceremonial, symbolic, an affirmation of mutual sentience. But this, they agreed, was something else entirely. An anomaly, a warning, perhaps, or an invitation to question everything. Overseer Vale, the being who had spoken first on Earth's surface, stood at the heart of the chamber, watching a stream of translated data flow across translucent threads of light. Behind Vale, Emissary Cohen replayed the moment of confusion, the humans' comment about working 40 hours a week just to live. They watched it again and again, parsing vocal tone, facial expression, eye dilation. It had the cadence of satire, but the rhythm of confession. And what troubled them most was a reaction from the surrounding humans. No denial, no laughter, just nods, shrugs, acceptance. This is not deception, Cohen said, voice low. Vale nodded slowly. It is belief. To understand such belief, they needed to witness it firsthand. From orbit, microdrones no larger than sand particles rained undetected across continents. They embedded themselves in cities, suburbs, megastructures, even within the fibers of clothing and furniture. The observational sweep began, and what they found stunned them. In vast, illuminated towers that blinked all night like ancient beacons, humans sat in rows under artificial light, tethered to glowing rectangles, fingers twitching, eyes dim. They clicked, scrolled, typed, actions without end. Outside, others ran between delivery vehicles, hauling food they could not afford to eat. Some stood in rain at bus stops. Others begged in shadow corners while advertisements above them promised joy, luxury, escape. The drones recorded the sounds of frustration, sighs, honks, the mechanical rhythm of cash registers, the hollow cheer of hold music. They captured laughter, too, but it was tired, frayed at the edges. The kind of laughter not born from joy, but as a release valve from pressure. Within the ship, the analysts began compiling the first cultural cross-reference, human labor behaviors versus cognitive purpose. What they found disturbed them. By all known models, humanity had enough resources, technology, and labor-saving systems to eradicate scarcity. And yet, scarcity persisted, engineered, ritualized, defended. We believe them a fledgling enlightened species, murmured Historian Draxel. But they are something stranger. They are a species that has learned to mythologize suffering. Meanwhile, one of the observational drones embedded itself inside a small cafe in what the humans called Chicago. There, a young woman named Samira wiped down tables between double shifts. She spoke aloud to a colleague, unaware of the device observing. "You know," she said, "I used to think this was temporary. Just till I figured out what I really wanted. But now I'm 32, and all I want is to not be exhausted." Her colleague chuckled without humor. "Maybe exhaustion is just what adulthood feels like." The drone transmitted the clip. The analysis team paused. Cohen spoke first. "They are aware," they said. "They know the cycle is unsustainable, and yet they continue." Vale stepped forward. "Is this self-destruction?" "No," replied Draxel. "It is a ritual of belonging. They fear isolation more than exhaustion. To step outside the system is to lose family, shelter, identity. They joke about it to mask the grief." "And the laughter?" asked Cohen. "It is their form of rebellion," said Draxel, eyes narrowing. "Not to change the system, but to survive it." Another drone transmitted a conversation from a corporate boardroom. Elite humans discussing quarterly projections. One man said, "We can increase the work week to 48 hours globally. People won't like it, but they'll adapt." Another responded, "As long as we feed them hope and Wi-Fi, they'll keep running." The room laughed. The aliens watched in silence. This was not the universal cooperation they had encountered on other worlds, not the post-scarcity harmony of the Onari, nor the evolutionary symbiosis of the Vexari. Humanity was unique, innovative, adaptable, but deeply entangled in systems of its own making. And then, in a low-orbit council session, Vale made a decision. "We must speak again," Vale declared. "Not to enlighten, not to judge, but to ask." Within hours, a second landing was prepared. This time, it would not be at a remote desert site. This time, it would be in the heart of one of humanity's great cities. New York, Tokyo, Johannesburg, Mumbai. It did not matter. The message would be the same. Back on Earth, Elias Monroe had not slept. His name now ran across global headlines as the first to speak to them. He felt no pride in that title, only weight. He watched the news feeds from every corner of the world. Protesters gathered. Conspiracy theories exploded. Philosophers gave lectures in panic or glee. And under it all, people kept working. Fast food chains remained open. Office buildings were full. The rhythm continued, like nothing had changed. Mia sat beside him in silence, fingers tapping the edge of a mug. "What are they waiting for?" she asked. "They're studying us," Elias replied. "They're trying to figure out if we're joking. And what if they decide we're not?" Elias didn't answer. 2 days later, the sky opened again, this time above the United Nations headquarters. The vessel did not hide. It hovered low, visible, undeniable. People screamed, cried, live-streamed. And then it spoke, not through a delegate, not through a symbol, but through every screen, speaker, and device. A single voice, translated in every language. "We apologize. We misunderstood." The message paused. "We believed you to be masters of satire, but now we understand. You are sincere. You work because you are told to. You rest only when permitted. Your joy is rationed. Your time, your most sacred resource, is sold." There was silence, stretching long and deep. We do not understand why. So we ask, is this what you desire? The message ended. Elias sat forward. His hands trembled. All over the world, the same question echoed. Is this what you desire? In a cafe in Chicago, Samira stared at the screen. In a boardroom in London, a CEO shut his laptop. On factory floors, in classrooms, in homes, people stared at each other, unsure how to answer. The aliens waited. And this time, they did not laugh. The question had been asked. So simple, yet so piercing it fractured the world in silence. Is this what you desire? The transmission ended, and in the vacuum it left Something fragile began to stir. It wasn't revolution. Not yet, but it was something closer to reckoning. All over the planet, people looked at one another with the discomfort of having heard their lives summarized by outsiders who hadn't even been trying to insult them. No fire and brimstone. No threats. Just observation, filtered through unshakable disbelief. Samira sat in the break room of the cafe, still in her apron, surrounded by co-workers who were watching the loop of the alien message play again and again on a cheap wall-mounted screen. No one spoke. The silence was louder than any protest. One of the managers finally broke the stillness with a shallow laugh. "Guess they don't get capitalism." "Guess we don't either," Samira muttered. In Geneva, the emergency session of the United Nations had gone from order to chaos. Every delegate wanted the microphone. Every nation wanted to speak on behalf of humanity. Most just wanted to be seen speaking. Elias Monroe had been flown in hours earlier under tight security, ushered into the building like a diplomat, though he felt like a scapegoat. He wasn't sure what was expected of him. Translator, apologist, negotiator? "They're not asking for a treaty," he said to the gathered representatives of Earth's most powerful governments. "They're asking a question, and they're asking all of us." A diplomat from Argentina leaned forward. "So what's our answer?" Elias hesitated. "That's not something we can vote on in this room." "Well, we have to say something." Another snapped. "We've said plenty already," Elias replied. "They've been listening, watching, long before we saw them. What do you think they've heard in our policies, our daily broadcasts, our history?" The room fell quiet. A representative from Nigeria stood slowly. They saw a species that accepted labor as sacred and leisure as guilt. They saw that we glorify exhaustion and mock those who try to rest. We joked about the grind so much, they thought it was performance art. Mia Calderon, seated beside Elias, turned toward the screens displaying feeds from across the globe. Town halls, plazas, school auditoriums, all displaying the same words. "Is this what you desire?" But no single answer rose above the din. Some people mocked it. Others cried. In some places, the question inspired prayer. In others, riots. What none could do was ignore it. That night, in cities across the planet, projection holograms appeared silently in public spaces. They did not broadcast threats. They did not show the alien ships. They displayed only mirrors. Giant, translucent panes that reflected the crowds gathered beneath them. In bold, flickering text below each reflection, the question remained. Samira stood under one such display in Millennium Park, watching her own face flicker in the alien glass. A child beside her pointed and asked their father, "Why are they asking that? Can't they just tell us what to do?" The father hesitated. "Maybe they think it's not their place. But they're smarter than us, right? Maybe, or maybe they just listen better." The next day, a surprising voice emerged, though it was not from a government or a military leader. It came from an elderly woman named Dr. Helen Osei, a philosopher and cultural ecologist from Ghana, whose quiet lectures on post-colonial sustainability had rarely garnered international attention. She was interviewed live on a global stream, and her words cut to the chaos like a scalpel. "They ask us what we desire," she said. "But most of us have never been allowed to consider that question seriously. We are trained from childhood to be useful, not to be fulfilled. We are praised for productivity, not peace. Even love has become transactional. So now we flounder, not because the aliens are cruel, but because they have forced us to look at the one question our system refuses to ask." The clip went viral within hours. The alien said nothing. Elias and Mia were summoned to meet a special council, an ad hoc coalition of thinkers, scientists, and spiritual leaders. The politicians were beginning to recede, unable to spin or weaponize a question without an obvious agenda. The council met in Reykjavik, in an old glass hall surrounded by ice and silence. "What do we tell them?" someone asked. "Do we admit we don't know?" "No," Elias replied. "We tell them we're beginning to ask." "But will they wait?" Mia asked. "They've waited longer than we realize," Elias said. "The real question is, will we?" That night, as the cold wind swept across the Icelandic hills, the alien vessel moved again, not toward another capital, not toward a military base or a place of wealth. It descended quietly over a rural farming commune in northern India. It hovered there, and then a beam of light lowered a platform into the soil. On it stood a single alien. The villagers approached cautiously, not with weapons but with offerings, fruit, water, flowers. No translation was needed. The being accepted them with grace and sat cross-legged on the earth. For hours, it remained there, silent, listening to children speak, to elders sing, to farmers talk of soil and rain. When it finally spoke, the message was short. We see that you remember something the others have forgotten. From orbit, the aliens began to adjust their strategy. They stopped targeting governments. Instead, they sought out voices, forgotten wisdom keepers, artists who painted for no profit, tribes who still lived without clocks. They listened to laughter that was not cynical. They observed rest not bought by exhaustion, but rooted in rhythm. Mia and Elias watched these new encounters unfold from a monitoring station in Brussels. They're not evaluating our intelligence anymore, Mia said. They're evaluating our wisdom, Elias replied. The shift had begun, but it was not without resistance. Powerful institutions panicked. Economic markets dipped and surged in erratic bursts. A handful of media outlets branded the aliens as manipulative, sowing moral confusion. Some extremist groups claimed the entire scenario was a psyop. Still others, in quiet desperation, began issuing apologies to their own employees, to their families, to themselves. It was, as Dr. Osei later said, the slow unlearning of a global delusion. One evening, Samira returned home from work, sat on her bed, and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in her adult life, she felt the weight of her own agency. Not freedom, not yet, but the seed of it. She reached for her phone and deleted half the job alerts she had bookmarked. She didn't know what she'd do next. But for once, that uncertainty felt less like failure and more like possibility. Above her, in the skies where no stars had changed, but everything felt different. The alien vessel pulsed with a steady light. They were still watching, and humanity, for the first time in a long time, was beginning to watch itself. Snow fell softly over the streets of Reykjavik, cloaking the city in a hush that matched the world's mood. A month had passed since the aliens posed their question, and still the world wrestled with it. Not as a problem to solve, but as a mirror to stare into. Every day, new voices emerged. Not leaders, but ordinary people, finally daring to speak truths they had long buried under the weight of necessity. Elias Monroe sat in a modest apartment above a bookstore, hunched over a cluttered desk. He had been invited to speak at dozens of conferences, forums, and councils since the encounter, but he declined most of them. The more he was called the first contact, the more he felt like a reluctant symbol, not a man. He had become a vessel for projection, and he knew now how easy it was for symbols to be hijacked by systems they never chose. Mia Calderon entered without knocking, balancing 2 cups of coffee in one hand and a folder of documents in the other. She had taken leave from her teaching post, choosing instead to serve as a liaison between cultural observers and the International Council. They worked together now. Not as saviors, not as spokespersons of the human race, but as people trying to understand how deeply humanity had strayed from its own instincts. They landed again last night, Mia said, placing a cup beside Elias. This time in the Amazon basin. Spent 12 hours with the Iwanawa people. No media, no broadcast, just presence. Elias nodded. They're seeking continuity. Places where life isn't transactional. They're mapping sanity, she added. He turned toward her. Or memory. Outside, a quiet protest passed along the icy street. Signs handwritten, chants subdued. But these were not angry voices. They were tired ones. People were marching not for wages or laws, but for time, for the right to live without begging for rest. One sign simply read, "I miss my daughter's first words." For what? Elsewhere in the world, changes were beginning, not seismic, but subtle. A tech company in Finland eliminated the 40-hour week. An African cooperative returned to a barter system grounded in communal need. In Tokyo, a youth collective started creating time banks, hours traded for help, not money. None of these movements were coordinated. They arose like sprouts after long drought, each instinctively responding to something in the air. And above it all, the aliens remained silent. Vale, Cohen, and Draxel watched Earth's unfolding transformation not with detachment, but reverence. They had encountered civilizations on the brink of extinction before, systems collapsed by greed, entropy, war. But never had they witnessed a culture so tightly wrapped in its own rituals of struggle, yet so capable of recognizing them as choice instead of fate. Inside the observation chamber, Draxel rotated a projection of Earth's linguistic archive. The word work appears over 1 billion times per day across all major languages, often accompanied by terms like grind, hustle, survive, rarely by joy or purpose. Cohen drifted closer, yet they possess word for rest, for meaning, for enough, words they do not use. They remember, Vale said, but they do not believe they are allowed to remember. The three exchanged glances, the atmosphere between them tinged with something more complex than curiosity, something like hope. In Chicago, Samira walked out of the cafe for the last time. She hadn't quit in protest. There were no speeches, no dramatic exits. She simply knew, deep in the marrow of her being, that she could not unknow what she now knew. She had spent years trading hours for scraps, laughter for tips, dignity for compliance. And it wasn't even her fault. It was the shape of the world, the language she had been taught. Now, that language felt broken. She spent the morning applying to a local community arts collective, not because it paid well, but because it fed her spirit. For the first time, she was choosing without shame. Later that evening, she sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by old sketchbooks she had forgotten she owned. She drew, not for money, not for display, just to remember what it felt like to create without permission. Mia and Elias flew to Delhi for a gathering of educators, organizers, and thinkers. This was not a summit. There were no podiums, just circles of people sharing stories, what they were letting go of, what they were reclaiming. A young woman stood up and said, "I stopped calling myself lazy. I was tired. That's different." An older man wept quietly and whispered, "My son died thinking he hadn't done enough. He worked himself into the grave, and he thought that made him worthy." A teacher shared that he had stopped assigning homework, replacing it with weekly time for conversation and reflection. They learn more when they're not afraid. The room held space for all of it. No interruptions, no rush, just time, slow and sacred. In orbit, the alien council received a signal from Vale. It was time. The final contact was not dramatic. There was no spectacle, no fleets, no ultimatums. Just a quiet return to the spot of the first meeting. Arizona, the red earth shimmering beneath moonlight. Elias arrived with Mia and Samira by his side. There were no crowds this time, only a small circle of people who had lived the question and allowed it to reshape them. Vale emerged as before, luminous and graceful. The wind whispered through the scrub grass. The stars blinked their ancient light. "We asked what you desired." Vale said, "Now we ask what you remember." No one answered at first. Then Samira stepped forward. "I remember what it feels like to wake up and not dread the day." Elias followed. "I remember when silence didn't feel like failure." Mia added, "I remember stories not told for profit, but for meaning." Vale bowed their head gently. "Then you are ready, not for ascension, not for rescue, but for return." "To what?" Elias asked. "To yourselves." There were no fireworks, no golden gates of enlightenment, just a long, steady exhale that seemed to pass through the earth itself, as if something ancient had been waiting all along for humanity to remember that the point of life was never to earn it. The alien ship ascended, leaving no smoke or thunder in its wake. Only a question, still unanswered, still echoing, now etched into the hearts of billions. Is this what you desire? Not a judgment, a mirror. And for the first time in generations, humanity looked into it and saw not shame but choice.